Hello, Trail people. You're listening to the Trail Network podcast hosted by Rachel Drake, Hillary Yang, Katie Asmuth, and myself, Leah Yingling. We're here to celebrate the community, connections, and untold stories within trail running. Today, we have Caleb Olson here on the podcast. Caleb is last year's Western States champion and also a very good friend of mine here in Salt Lake City. He joins us on the podcast today to chat all things nutrition. Caleb is a precision fuel and hydration athlete, and he takes us through what his nutrition looks like on the trails and off the trails, and also what it's like balancing nutrition with his family and his full-time job. Really loved all the insights Caleb shared with us here on the podcast today, and I hope you do as well. Hello and welcome to the Trail Network podcast. I'm Leah Yingling, and I'm here today with Caleb Olson. Caleb had a breakout 2025, running the second fastest time in Western States history, just 8 weeks after becoming a dad, which I think is pretty cool. But we're not going to dive into Caleb's resume on here today, but maybe pull back the curtain a little bit on what goes on behind the scenes, from fueling to being a father, all the in-between life. Caleb, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on. We end up seeing a lot of each other, so I feel like this is a good place to have a conversation about behind the scenes life because you see more of it than most people.
Yeah, I've had the privilege of, watching from behind the scenes for the last 5 years now, and I feel like you've come a long way.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say in a lot of ways.
Yeah, we're a little over a month removed from your high pressure season opener at the Arches 50K in Moab, Utah. You tend to pick some of these early season 50Ks each year, and this also happened to be your first ultra in 2018, where you ended up in the hospital afterwards. So
It's
if you
true.
could look back and talk to your 2018 self, what do you think 2026 Caleb would tell him?
Oh, there have been so many learnings between now and then. I would say the first thing I would tell my 2018 self would be not to start that race because that was a huge mistake. I went into it undertrained and I had mono and didn't know it. So I had been pretty sick the whole week of and just taking like tons of ibuprofen to try and deal with all those symptoms of mono. And so I think I did some significant kidney damage and ended up in the hospital with rhabdo. So lots of learnings from that one, and luckily have not ended up in the hospital after an ultra since then.
Hey, that's impressive. Do you
Yeah.
think your 2018 self would expect your 2026 self to be where you are today from an ultra running perspective?
No, I know for a fact that my 2018 self did not expect that. I think I thought I would be working a 9 to 5 corporate software development job all day, every day right now.
I know. I think that's pretty cool to think about. Any listeners we have out there who maybe 8 years from now will be a Western States champ. Pretty cool.
Pretty cool.
So last year marked, I would call it a big transition on the professional front of ultra running for you, but also on the personal front when you became a dad last May. Do you think becoming a father has changed anything about the way you've been training, racing, or your life in general?
Yeah, I think it's changed a lot. And maybe you can add from what you've seen, but from my perspective, it has made it so that my training has become a lot more efficient. I do a lot more running from the house. I've gotten to really know and appreciate my backyard trails, which are great, but I don't get quite the same level of like exploration and social running that I used to do, um, which is sometimes kind of a bummer, but also it's really nice that I kind of set myself up in a way where I was ready to have a kid and be able to continue training well because we live in such an easy place to get out the door and have great access. I think another way that it's changed is we there's a lot more like when you're at home, you need to be on a
Mm.
bit more instead of just laying on a couch and relaxing and not really having anything to do if you're not running. Now it's very much like recovery's a little different and harder because you are like holding Marshall's hands while he practices walking around, and there's a lot less downtime. I don't
Yeah.
know. You share a bit about how yours has changed with Monty. You're going through the exact same thing, so I imagine a lot of our answers are probably the same.
Totally. Yeah, I think you talked about it in your Substack, which our listeners should go follow. I think it's some great, insightful writing on chasing trail. But you talked about this after coming back from team camp, Nike team camp in Palm Springs, where you really noticed the difference, even in like home life versus team camp, in terms of what it could look like to be a true all-in professional runner by means of what you were getting at that camp from a recovery and fueling standpoint. And I thought that was really interesting because, you know, there's a lot of people in the sport who are juggling a lot, but there's this added element of parenthood where you're truly never off. And I think that's something that before you are a parent, you can actually turn yourself off quite often and truly recover.
Yeah, definitely. Like I was thinking at team camp, like if life was just like this always, it would be kind of cool. It would also be kind of weird. And I think in a lot of ways, kind of this like I don't know, almost like fake way to live life where you don't really have to do anything to yourself for yourself and you're just kind of a robot, like eating what is given to you and running and doing nothing else all day. But I do think that it's very good for that kind of lifestyle could be very good for just getting you fit if that's all you cared about in life.
Yeah, it takes me back to some of the podcasts we've heard, like Francesco Pupi and Tom Evans on in recent years about that very like dialed nature of the sport of like training to get fit. And I think you have this paradoxical way of thinking about your training often, which is you like to do the things that excite you. You like to have fun with your training as often as you can within the parameters of your training. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I guess in particular, you had a big goal right towards the end of 2025 that you were targeting by hitting 1 million vertical feet, which I thought was pretty fun.
Yeah, that was fun. I think like I got into the sport because it's fun to run around outside and like we get to go see cool things with our friends. And I think at the core, that's what it's still all about. But now being a professional ultra runner, like if I want to continue making a career out of this, I need to also go win races and show up for brand activations and team camps and that sort of thing. So there are other aspects to it that aren't always just like the pure enjoyment of the mountains that I got into it for, but they're also really cool in their own ways. And I think I've like, gained more of a respect and appreciation for the fun that can be like pure competition and competing against yourself and seeing how hard you can push yourself, seeing progress over time and like improving in workouts, even though it's not the fun that I have like exploring high in the mountains. It is fun in a different way to like push myself and compare week over week and see how much better I'm getting.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think there's also a season for these mountain adventures, and that tends to be like late summer after some of the core races are out of the way. We can still leave time for these really fun things and still sneak plenty of cool, fun runs with Mike and Leah and the drone, that kind of thing, into many of our like midweek runs.
You made a coaching transition after Western States last year, and you're now working with two, I don't even know how you would describe them, just expert scientists at the Nike Performance Lab who are kind of taking the reins on your training. And something that I've enjoyed seeing, I know not everybody has the privilege of seeing your training because you're Strava dark most of the time, but you still get to incorporate big ski days in your training. Is there any insight you have for our listeners who might be multi-sport athletes on that aspect of training?
I think if like you enjoy another sport, like cycling or skiing seem to be two of the more common and applicable ones. Winter's a great time to be doing those things. They add good base volume and lower impact. And even though I do enjoy them, they're less convenient than running. They take up more time. They require more driving to get to, at least for skiing. And so I don't actually like do that much of them, but I do like it and I mix it in, especially if like I have something that's bugging me and I need to take some time off of feet or off of running a bit. I think they're great ways to continue training big, but without beating up your body quite as much all year round.
Yeah, I think that part's important, and I feel like that's something that you've tended to value over the years is taking those off seasons and those downtimes to enjoy the things that you're passionate about, which I think everybody can incorporate that into their training, whether they're an amateur runner or professional runner.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think so. What do you do that's not running that gets you off your running rhythm a
Not
little bit?
much. I think Mike a couple weeks ago was talking about how he's a one-trick pony with photography
Yeah, I
and
heard you
just
say that.
being shooting trail running, and unfortunately for both of us, we like trail running. We do hike. We'll hike with Monty, and, we've been going to the public pool lately with him, so I think
The splash
Monty's our
pad?
new hobby.
Nice. Yeah, that's
Uh,
fun.
we're gonna dive into nutrition here in a little bit, but I'm curious about, some of the things you've been up to in recent months. One of those things has been, man, the ACG push, the marketing push that I think everybody is seeing. You got to be a big part of the crazy train that ACG had at the Winter Olympics. Can you talk a little bit about your trip out to Cortina last month?
Yeah, that was really cool. Like you said, ACG's been going kinda crazy with all this launch activation stuff that they're doing. They're making a big push into the trail space, and I think showing up in, like, a cool and kind of unique way to trail runners maybe, where, like, uh, we haven't seen amongst like the other common trail running brands. I feel like there's not quite the same level of ability to go big with marketing stunts that Nike has, and in some ways that kind of stands out. Um, I think a lot of that is because they want to appeal to a broader audience than just the core trail runners, and they're using trail running as this gateway to say like, look at this cool thing that these people are doing in this gear, and it can be used for these extreme adventures, but it's also something that everybody can use, and it's uh, I think they're trying to make the outdoors fun and accessible and less intimidating for the general public, and I really like that idea. And that's kind of what the train in Italy idea was. It was like a way to connect this urban Milan, like the big city of Milan, this fashion center where the Olympics are going on, to kind of the wild, like Lake Como, the mountains up above there, city of Lecco. And so it was bringing out these groups of people who, some of them had experience with like trail running or getting out into cool, adventurous places before, and a lot of them didn't. A lot of them were maybe social media figures or like accounts that like retail partners, but they brought a lot of these people out to experience this ride out to the wild and then go on this adventure where we did a big trail run. We got a nice meal in a cool like refuge hut thing up in the mountains, and the entire thing is just decked out orange, um, classic ACG branding. But yeah, it's a fun, I don't know, unique way to connect these people to the outdoors and hopefully invite them in on like the ACG angle that they're trying to take on trail running.
And you got to meet Eliud Kipchoge, which is pretty cool.
Yes, that was cool. That was a highlight. Got to meet Yannick Sinner, and I like tennis, so he's like one of the best tennis players ever. But that was really cool to get to meet some professional people who are not in the trail running space.
Oh, that's neat. Okay, so something I wanted to focus on this podcast was largely around nutrition. I feel like a lot of our conversations lately, mine and yours, have revolved around eating and
Yeah.
eating enough, whether
Yep.
that's before the run, during the run, after the run. I think we're always convening around food whenever it comes to our hangouts.
Hmm.
And I think it's a really important topic for ultra running and something that I don't think a lot of people get right. And it's really easy to get wrong. Uh, so something that you wrote on one of your Substacks in the last year, you actually have written a lot about food, I realize, or at least use food analogies on your Substack. So I think your mind must always be
Food's a
thinking
big
about
deal for me.
yeah. But something you wrote was fitness alone doesn't win ultras. And I don't think I've ever related to a statement more because I think every time I line up in an ultra, I look around me and I'm like, there's so many more fit people on the start line than me.
Right.
However, I think there's all those little controllables that go into it that play an important piece. And I think it's something that we learn over time. and I've witnessed your career over the years, and like you've you weren't always didn't always have a perfect nutrition plan in races. So can you talk a little bit about your trajectory over the years, what that's looked like? Maybe as you were first getting into ultras, how you were fueling your runs, and kind of how you've progressed over time, and to the point of fueling 100 plus carbs an hour at Western States this year in order to take home the win.
So that very first ultra where I ended up in the hospital, Arches 50K, I don't think I ate or drank a single thing the whole time
Oh
because
my
I was
god.
sick and couldn't, and I was throwing up anything that I tried to put down. So I've come a long way since then, but it's been kind of this gradual, like I went from, I think the like, I don't even know what you call it, but the pattern, the strategy that I thought you were supposed to do was 1 gel an hour. I didn't think about how big the gel was or what the gel was or anything like that. It was just the rule is 1 gel an hour. But I was using like goo and spring energy and like these things that definitely did not have as many carbs as I should have been taking in an hour, or in some cases, as many carbs as I thought I was taking in an hour because they were mislabeled. But um, I went from that to actually, I think, meeting you guys and seeing your strategies taught me a lot. I remember, I think it was before Canyon's 100K. I still had no idea what I was doing, and I had just a handful of like Rice Krispie treats and Sour Patch Kids and random gels that I had like collected from various races for free. And then I looked over and saw you, and you had like all your labeled Ziploc bags for every aid station and what you're going to be carrying throughout the whole race. Like set out like little Halloween candy piles on the floor the night before, going over the whole plan. And that was the first time I ever realized that you could do that, or like that putting that much thought into it was something that anyone did. And so after that, I think we actually had some consulting calls, me and you, and I would go over a little bit of what I was thinking before races, and like Lake Sonoma, I think specifically comes to mind as sort of a turning point because you crewed me for that one. And I think I went into that with like a handful of spring gels, and you gave me some pushback and were like, you should probably be taking more than this. Like, I'm just going to hand you what you need whenever I see you, and make sure you eat those before the next time I see you. But that was really helpful. And that started through this whole trajectory that I'm explaining. My results were also getting better and better. And I think that's related to making these uh, discoveries around nutrition. But then what really got me was at Worlds in 2023. I didn't, it's like I forgot everything I had learned, and I made no plan and had no idea what I was doing, didn't know where the aid stations were. Like, I can't believe I went into it so unprepared and ended up getting really dehydrated and didn't eat nearly enough. And so I just bonked and I was puking and so low energy and just walked for hours and hours and hours and had a terrible race. And after that, I was like, okay, I really need to figure things out. And Eric LaPuma was on that team, and he was sponsored by Precision, and I had never seen that gel before. And I didn't really know. I felt like I didn't know what to talk to all these other people on the world's team about because I was the only like not pro runner, and I felt like they were all so much cooler and better than me. And then so I was just like, so what do you guys use for nutrition? Like making small talk with them.
It's like a first
And
date.
yeah, because that's what people talk about. What shoes are you gonna wear? What do you eat for gels? And Eric showed me his precision gel, and I think he let me try a little bit of it. And I remember liking the taste of it. After that race went terribly, I thought I need to figure out nutrition. Like that was the worst. I can't do that again. And so I went online and ordered a bunch of precision to give it a shot. Used it a bunch over the rest of the summer. Had a great Cape Town with it later that year. And that was sort of my whole turning point where like then I started getting opportunities for pro contracts, and I kind of realized like if I can just nail this nutrition thing, I'm pretty good at running and will have opportunities in the sport.
Do you think what happened to you at Worlds is an easy thing? Like that happens to a lot of people, because I think something that strikes me as interesting there is you were so goal oriented going into that, like making the Worlds team, that was an accomplishment in itself. Do you think those like international races that like you work hard to get to, um, you think a lot in that process leading up to it? And what happens then, like, when that big race gets here? Because that's
Yeah,
interesting.
it is interesting. I think we see the same thing with like golden ticket races in Western states, or like for some people, the qualifying process for UTMB takes a long time. Anything where you work really hard to just qualify for another race, you kind of focus so much on the qualifier, especially if they're close together, that you sometimes like let up off the gas a little bit, and the final thing that you were trying so hard to qualify for is just your victory lap. But then because of that, and because it doesn't get the attention that it really needs and deserves, sometimes it is super disappointing. And I think that's
Yeah.
what happened in that case.
That's interesting. So yeah, you found precision, started using that at Cape Town. And I think Cape Town, I talked about this last year being a big turning point of your ultra running career, but I actually think there's like Grindstone 100K where you got your golden ticket to Western States, and then Cape Town 100K where you came out with a second place finish. Pretty tight race there where, you're wearing your Air Vapor running kit as you cross the finish line, like unsponsored runner. I think that
Yeah.
was a pretty big turning point for you as well. And it's cool to hear that those turning points are associated with a change in nutrition.
They're definitely directly correlated to how much thought and planning and practice I was putting into nutrition. And like maybe one of the biggest things was not just suddenly like trying to do it all perfectly on race day, but buying enough of these gels and stuff that I could actually train with them, because it's such a hard thing mentally for me to get myself to spend the money to, like, you just know I'm going on this long run today. That's going to be, $20 worth of gels or whatever, and then stack that up day after day, week after week. Like that gets so expensive, and it's a pain and it's hard for me, but also if you do it, it makes such a big difference. It's so much better than just eating the like Sour Patch Kids or whatever candy you do. And it makes running the next day so much better. Like you recover so much better. Everything goes so much better if you're willing to invest in yourself and just do that.
Totally. And you went from being self-coached to working with a coach before your win at Trans Gran Canaria last year and your win at Western States,
Mhm.
which likely meant, more focused training and perhaps even like an uptick in volume. Can you talk a little bit about just like how much fueling on the run and then pre-run, post-run contributed to being able to withstand the training that you've put in those blocks, but then also the past 6 months too since Western States?
Yeah. I feel like I do during racing, during training. It's the same rates, the same like amount of carbs, all that stuff. I
Mm.
don't even really think about it at this point. I just know like I eat one precision 90-gram gel per hour, and I don't overthink it because that's easy math. And if I'm also drinking a drink that's got some carbs in it, then that gets me over 100 grams an hour. That's a really good, nice spot for me to be able to put in high quality work and recover the next day. So I feel really good about my nutrition while I'm running, whether that's training or racing. But what I think I've been coming around on, and like still have some room to improve, but am noticing the importance of more and more, is making sure that I've gotten in something decent before I start a run, and then immediately after a run, and then throughout the entire rest of the day so that I'm ready again to do a solid run the next day.
Mm.
And if you fall behind on one of those days and go into a workout slightly depleted, then you've completely depleted yourself by the end of it. You kind of have like a little bit of a hard time eating right after a workout, or at least I do. Like your stomach doesn't immediately want to start to smashing carbs after you finish a hard run. So then I don't eat for a couple hours, and I like really my only meal sometimes is just like a late lunch and a dinner. And it's really hard to get in enough that way. So I've had to be a lot more conscious about like sometimes even mixing up some extra drink mix in the evening. Like, even though it feels weird because I'm not running, like I'll mix up the Precision makes a carb only drink mix where I'll do some of that in the evening, sometimes before a key workout or long run, just to get like an extra carb top off. And it's a little hard to get used to and get myself to do it. But when I do, I feel way better the next day.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway. I was recently meeting with a nutritionist myself because I have felt that postpartum, breastfeeding, just getting back into my kind of status quo of training again has left me feeling way more depleted than I have in the past. And I think it's because there's a lot more variables on the table. And what I heard from her about some of my like bigger training days for like my body size was, 11 plus servings of carbs a day, which sounds outrageous. And some of the tips she gave me were very similar to what you said just there was like adding electrolyte drink or like a carbohydrate drink, something extra, adding honestly, candy pre-run or like easy carbs throughout the day, which feels counterproductive or counterintuitive when you're somebody that is health forward and health minded. But I think when you're trying to fuel your best for performance, it's vital. And you wrote a Substack, I think last year, that laid out this like kind of this day of sorts of how it could go as an athlete, of just kind of ticking the boxes, but like not doing a great job with any meal or any snack throughout the day. And you kind of laid out this potential for an athlete of being completely like deprived by the next day as it rolls around. We'll have to link it in the show notes.
I think with what you're saying, one of the big discoveries I've had is like, I kind of mentioned it with the carb drink, but like just liquid carbs, like adding honey or maple syrup or fruit juice, or looking for like really easy, digestible, kind of low volume, dense ways to get in carbs has been a nice way to slip in those extra servings. Because otherwise, if you're eating like 11 servings of quinoa or sweet potatoes or something like that a day, it would just be so much volume that it'd be really hard to handle.
Yeah, I like that. And something that I think is interesting about you, because it's not true of myself and it's also not true of my partner, but you're the cook in the house. You do most of the cooking.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what that looks like? Because you enjoy cooking, and I feel like you've had a family life over the years that has encouraged that. And I would love if you could describe to our audience how you were brought up with your family and cooking, because I personally want to implement this in my family as it grows, and I'd love for people to learn from that.
Yeah, growing up, so I have 3 siblings and 2 parents, so that's 6 of us, 7 days in a week. So we each got assigned a dinner night, like a day of the week. I had Thursdays, and then we had one kind of free floater day where somebody, usually my mom, would just make something, but um, Thursdays, I was in charge of dinner, starting at probably like age, I don't know, 6 or something, like way too young to ever like actually make a dinner. But I would, at the beginning, I would just pick what we were having. So I'd say like, I want lasagna. And then my mom would help me like think through what I should write on her grocery list that we needed for lasagna. And then she would make it. And I would like help her crack eggs or whatever. I don't know. Probably not eggs because that's not even lasagna, but um, I would help make it. And then it got to the point where like I was making it, but it was just like mac and cheese. And then eventually I was actually making decent stuff. And so that got me early in the habit of cooking. And I do think that's a fun way to do it and something that I'd like to do with Marshall and our family eventually. But yeah, I do most of the cooking here. So I have a lot of control over what we eat, for better or worse. Sometimes that works against me if I have a lot of running and work and I'm feeling lazy and haven't been shopping recently, then I'm the one who blew it, and that's the reason why we're eating pancakes for dinner or whatever. But um, yeah, usually it's a good thing, and we eat pretty well.
So I think you've evolved that method now into something that you're doing in 2026, which I think's pretty fun too. And I don't know if you're still sticking with it, but I guess I'm going to hold you to it now. Yeah, talk about your ChatGPT plus kind of gourmet meal, fine dining meal that you're working on this year, and kind of the stepwise process that is.
Okay, I started out so strong in January, and I fell off a little bit in February, but then recently I'm really back on it. So it, the original idea is just I want to become a better chef, and I want to cook high quality, fancy meals because I think it's fun. And like making good food makes me want to eat more, and that's a good thing. And I think like having Chat GPT or whatever AI tools you like to converse with is kind of a nice way to like have a conversation about what would be some fun meals to prep or to cook, and do some brainstorming there, and then have it help you think through a grocery list. And then I can I'm trying to automate things and like make it easier for myself so that I'm not spending so much time doing the not actual cooking part of cooking, like making grocery lists and plans and doing the shopping and stuff. So I'm ordering more groceries from my grocery store online and like doing these things where I'm trying to make it as easy as possible and focus my time on just the cooking and the eating. And that's been nice. I've made some fun meals. I think I did a lot of experimenting with different types of fish and like cooking fish methods in January. And paired with that, like a lot of different sorts of root purees that I don't normally cook with, like celery root. Usually I just do mashed potatoes or something, but that was fun to try new flavors and new types of roots. And this past week, I've been working on steak and lobster and surf and turf kind of
Wow.
theme. So, yeah,
Oh, excited for
I guess
dinner
that's been
tomorrow.
my cooking adventure. Is this year I'm trying to make at least one fancy, really high quality meal per month.
That's pretty good. You've got a hefty schedule this year. You got Madeira is coming up in April, and then
Uh-huh.
UTMB at the end of the summer. I guess nothing in between those really though, right?
Yeah. So, well, I don't know. My schedule's kind of in flux a little bit right now. The original plan was Buffalo Run 50K, Gorge 30K, Madeira 115K, and UTM. Oh, and probably Chongli 50K and UTMB. Some of those I think are not going to make the cut. I'm rearranging a little bit of my races in the near future to prioritize kind of health and focus on some of the later season stuff. But I'm going to be out at Gorge 30K. I'm going to be trying to be ready for Madeira and then probably make a trip out to China. And most of the focus that I for sure want to be good to go for is UTMB.
Nice. And
Yeah.
I would say Western states and UTMB, we see people do the double all the time, but like they're very different races. And from a nutrition perspective, I think require different approaches. Do you find yourself in the buildup here? I know, we're still 6 months away from UTMB, a little less than 6 months. Do you
Mhm.
find yourself thinking about the ways that your nutrition will have to adapt or change for a race like UTMB?
I have been thinking about it. You would know better than me since you've run it, but I did do the GPT 100 in November, which went through a cold, dark night and hopefully gave me a little insight into how nutrition needs to change overnight and going for that long. I think what I've noticed is it's quite hard to want to eat and drink in the cold and overnight. Like your body is used to sleeping through the night, just kind of shutting down, slowing down the metabolism. But you can't actually let that happen if you want to continue the same power output through the night. So I have been thinking about how to avoid that. I think like strategically using caffeine probably is part of the key, making sure that the like fuel sources are something that either can be warmed up or are like in a easily accessible format, even if you're wearing like a jacket. So like not having stuff buried beneath a bunch of layers, I guess is what I'm getting at. What do you think? As somebody who has run both before, what was the main difference that you think I should know?
I was just talking about this today on a run with a friend. The one thing that felt so important to me was the need and desire for like something more complex than
Mm,
straight sugars around Courmayeur, which is halfway to 100K, and just like how much I didn't know I needed that, but my body was truly like craving it and desiring like a meal. And I
mhm,
think it's because, we start in the night and you don't really get to eat your dinner. And I think you don't realize how much your dinner actually like satiates you and fuels you. So
mm,
I think at UTMB this year for me, I'm going to like initially when I ran UTMB last time, I had like some pasta noodles, but I think having like mashed potatoes or pierogies or something like that that is like truly substantial that I can take with me or noodles
mm.
uh, I think is vital because I was so hungry by Art Nouveau and then La Folie, and the aid stations are just like broth and rice, and I
Yeah.
just like wanted a meal. And then Mike got me like a whole thing of French fries at Valorcine, and that was life-giving.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never been able to do that before. Like even GPT 100 was my longest race ever, and that was 21 hours. And even during that, I had options because I thought that that might happen, and I had more real food options. And for some reason, maybe my superpower is I can just take down those precision
Yeah.
90-gram gels all day, every day, because that never actually got old for me. I just put one of those down an hour.
Do you rotate between, like, gels and chews, or are you strictly like a
No.
90 gram? You know?
Yeah, no, I keep it simple. It's just one PF90 an hour all day.
You know, and something I will say is precision has kept it so standardized, and I think the recommendations we see kind of are varying at times, but, like, 90 grams kind of sits right in the middle of, that 60 to 120 that we see in ultra running right now,
Yeah,
and it makes it easy of, like, "Okay, I need to take one of these in an hour." You might be taking in 1/2 of that pouch in the first 10 minutes of that hour, and then the rest, but, like, you are getting that in, and that is your goal. So I almost
yeah.
think it segments each hour in a nice way too.
Yeah, and I like that it's resealable. Like, that's why, like you just said, you might take half of it in the first 10 minutes because you feel kinda hungry, and then you might not wanna touch it again for 45 minutes, but then you can pull it out again at the end of the hour because, you need 1 empty wrapper for every hour you've
Mhm.
been going, and that's like, it makes it easy for me to keep track.
Have you ever had your crew take your trash at an aid station and look at you disappointingly in how little you had consumed on a certain section, or are you always making them proud?
I mean, you know better than anybody, but I think that every once in a while, I maybe am not making the crew super proud, and I'm slightly making them a little nervous about how the next section's gonna go, but in general, I can do it pretty well.
I will say you are good at adapting on the fly, though. So something I saw at Western States this year, and I think this is a good takeaway for a lot of our listeners too, is it's very easy to go into a race with a plan, and you might see that plan as quite rigid and needing to follow it to the T. At Western States this year, I think at the last aid station, we saw you at Pointed Rocks, and by our updates, we saw that it was gonna be a tight race for 1st and 2nd between you and Chris Myers, and you had taken kind of, like, your own personal limit of caffeine for that day, and at the last aid station, I think I shoved a caffeinated gel in your hand and made you take it right there in front of us, and that wasn't in the plan, but it was something that, like, kind of looked like was what you needed at that moment in time. Can you
Yeah.
talk about, like, allowing yourself to be flexible in important races like that with your nutrition?
It's smart to make a plan before, and I think it's something that people should be doing, and if you don't go in with any plan, that's not good, but, things change throughout the day. You never know how your stomach's actually gonna feel, and if you really feel like you're just gonna puke everything up if you take one more little sip, then, like, don't take that sip
Yeah.
and play it by ear, change things up a little bit, and, I think if you have a crew that you trust that is telling you, "You need to take this to get you to the finish," then, like, if you possibly can, listen to them, and usually they're in a better state of mind than you are if it's 100 degrees and you've been running for 13 hours.
Yeah. What do you think is one nutrition thing that everyday runners could do better with that they're not currently doing?
I say this as a hypocrite, but, like, probably protein intake.
Mm,
I remember we went down to St. George once for somebody's birthday, a mutual friend, and, I think you were there,
I
but
was.
late at night, Anna Fisher was very adamant that we are all not getting enough protein, and she really drilled home the importance of making sure that I was getting more protein and having protein snacks available all the time to me. And so that's something that stuck with me since then, and I think I've done a bit better of a job with, but still have room to improve. The tricky part is just like when you're like, okay, I got to be getting enough carbs, but also I got to be getting enough protein. But that protein, like if it's meat based, is going to take up more room in my stomach and fill me up more, and then I'm not going to want more of the carb. Like it's a constant game of trade offs, and it's hard to do it all perfectly. And you got to just do the best you can and do what sounds good. I also think one thing that's been really helpful for me with that is I, uh, disclaimer, I'm sponsored by Kodiak, but I have a ton of Kodiak products all over my house, including pancakes that are delicious and high in carbs and high in protein. So finding little sneaky ways to get protein in your favorite carb snacks that you don't really even notice, I think can be a helpful way to make sure you're doing it all.
And do you think there's anything that people in the sport right now are, like, overcomplicating with nutrition?
I mean, even this conversation, like the fact that we're doing this is probably overcomplicating
That's
it.
so
Like
true.
at the end of the day, just eat a lot. But um, I mean, I think sometimes you'll hear about certain runners doing like really either insanely high or insanely specific carb targets during races. We talk about carbs during races the most, so I feel like that's what ends up getting the most overcomplicated. But hearing like carb goals for specific sections of a certain race or like carb goals exceeding 120 grams an hour, that sort of thing, I think can be great for very, very specific people, but then are set into the public as like a guideline and probably don't apply or help most 99% of people.
I agree, and I think the basics of training well, sleeping well, you're a champion sleeper. We compared
I'm so good at sleep.
sleep scores the other night, and yours put mine to shame, so
Oh yeah.
I
You
think
gotta boost those numbers up. 6.5 hours is not going to cut it.
it's not gonna cut it, but your 9 plus hours is gonna cut it. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think you
that's
bring up a good
important.
point of, like, doing the basics well, and you've always been somebody that doesn't overcomplicate things. I think anytime I ask you about, like, are you taking, like, vitamin D or creatine? And, like, you're not. You train well, you sleep well, you focus on good nutrition, and I feel like we see that come together in a great way with how you listen to your body, with your performances that you see out there. So,
Yeah, not
prop
to contradict you too much, but I am taking vitamin D and occasionally creatine. Sorry to disappoint.
I feel like every past conversation we've had, you haven't.
Yeah, well, now I need to take some extra good care of my bones, so vitamin D and calcium supplements have been in.
Yeah, they're in. I will say from talking to a nutritionist in the recent weeks, I think we're all just not taking in as much as we need to truly support the training that we're doing, um, regardless of where you're at in your life. I think if you're an ultra runner, you're running a lot, and fueling is really important. And I really appreciate you lending your insight on our podcast here about what's worked for you over the years. What do you think's one big takeaway that you're implementing this year as you approach UTMB?
Mm, uh, the biggest thing on my mind right now is just what we already covered about, I'd say outside of the run, carbs. Like
Mhm.
if I had to narrow it all down to one thing, it's that I need to be just overall throughout the day getting in more carbs, keeping my energy levels closer to baseline and not spending too much time in a deficit because of not eating for too long and going for a long run and missing meals and that sort of thing. So yeah, one takeaway is keep the carbs coming in at a very high rate outside of training.
Thanks, Caleb, for joining us on the Trail Network podcast to talk all things nutrition. I learned so much, and I hope you did as well. Thanks to our listeners for being here. If you're interested in precision fuel and hydration products like the ones Caleb talked about on today's episode, visit the Precision Fuel and Hydration website, pfandh.com, and use our discount code TTNP15 at checkout. My personal favorite products are the 60-gram chew bar and the 90-gram gel. These have been fueling my training over the last couple months as I've been ramping up my training to get in shape for my first few postpartum races back. I'll be racing 9 trails this weekend in Santa Barbara, and I'm gearing up for the Madera 80K at the end of April, and I've been using Precision Fuel and Hydration products to get me there. Again, you can visit their website and use our discount code TTNP15. Until next time.